walked an hour, captured by leaf, gently bear to fall, the details in between, an offering so deep. How would you massage God? Would you smother him in blazing red, canary yellow, or I'd take golden fog, mellow leaf, needle off through fingertips to deeply treat his aching back while he is so busy.
Good day, everybody. Happy Saturday. I hope you're all happy and healthy. This is Candlelight Nook, the book corner. My name is Diogo, and I'm very glad to be with you all today. If you're new here, every Saturday we get together and read from a book. Hopefully have some interesting conversations. This round we're doing Teachings of Queen Kuntī, which is a very special book because it's kind of a time capsule of some prayers that were spoken 5,000 years ago at the end of a great battle by a saint. In the same way that hearing a beautiful piece of music by a composer that has put their whole heart into it, hearing prayers and the words spoken by saintly people have the ability to affect the deepest level of our consciousness. It can help us reorient our values, and it can inspire us to behave more true to our own north. So we're doing something different today because the Saturday edition is mostly just distributed as a podcast. We're live on Instagram, but this will be available for download on Apple Podcast and Buzzsprout. So we're not going to do a video accompanying it because that just takes way too much data, and we're supposed to be able to, plug in wherever we are and just listen to the audiobook version of Teachings of Queen Kuntī. So I'm already thinking about the next book that we're going to read. Two possibilities are the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ, which I began reading, and it's very stunning, and the Corpus Hermeticum, which I also began reading, and I'm a few chapters in, but I would begin again from the very beginning. So what we're interested in the book club is bringing to the public forum contemporary or ancient literature that is about the eternal principles of spiritual life. And we'll find that those eternal principles of spiritual life are exhibited by saints across time, across space, in all different cultures, and in all different languages, which is what's so interesting about the principles of spiritual life, that they are non-sectarian. So bhakti, as it's called in the Sanskrit traditions, simply means devotional service to the Supreme Being. But when you see that Jesus Christ, when asked, what is the ultimate duty, responded that we should love our neighbors as ourselves and love God above all things. And so that principle of love is, of course, manifested through service, and so we see a similarity there between the Christian faith, or the Abrahamic religions, and the Sanskrit traditions. But then also in the Corpus Hermeticum, we can see how the Gnostic traditions were really based on this these bodies of work that were about knowledge. And so the Corpus Hermeticum describes how everything is connected. And it establishes, through philosophical reason, that if you're trying to gain some benefit by serving something or someone, And if you then learn that that person or thing that you're serving is connected to an even greater thing, and that your reward, in quotes, is going to be even greater for loving what that source is, then wouldn't it benefit you to learn what that source is? And so there's so much knowledge describing what is nature, how is it all part of one unified reality, and ultimately, how can we come into contact with that unified reality directly? So that's a small plug for things to be looking forward to in the future. If you have any suggestions of literature that we can read or that you'd like to read together, please let us know. You can write to us at the team here at candlelightnook@gmail.com or find us on Instagram. So, without further ado, let's begin the teachings of Queen Kuntī. We are in the second chapter now. Just to give a small recap, we've already been through the introduction, which gives a little contextual analysis on where this body of work fits in the corpus of the Vedic literatures, specifically when it happened in time, what were the circumstances surrounding it, and who this Saint Kuntī was related to. The first chapter that we read is about the original person, and so she begins her prayers describing the original person and attributing that original personality to Krishna. And so we're beginning now with chapter 2, which is the second verse of these prayers, and it's called Beyond the Senses. We begin with an invocation prayer to make sure that our environment is conducive to this kind of conversation. The same way that we burn incense in a room when someone special is coming or when we want to relax, we similarly invoke the presence of the divine by mantras. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Maya Jawanika Chanam Agya Doksha Jamavyayam Na Lakshya Se Mudha Drisha Nato Natya Daroyata. And the translations goes like this: being beyond the range of limited sense perception, you are the eternally irreproachable factor covered by the curtain of deluding energy. You are invisible to the foolish observer, exactly as an actor dressed as a player is not recognized. That's beautiful. So she's continuing her prayers to Krishna now, and she's saying that he is beyond the range of limited sense perception. Of course, by sense perception, we mean the eyes. So it's very difficult to perceive the totality of God with limited eyes. So imagine, for example, that you have a Nokia. Those really old Nokias, they call them the Nokia bricks. And I want to show you a TikTok video. How can your Nokia brick play that TikTok video? And we're only talking here about two things that are removed by a decade. Or two tops. But I think that the Nokia brick was around in 1999, and right now we're in 2020, so 21 years. Yeah. So just between 21 years, this wonderful feat of technology at the time, the Nokia brick, just in 20 years, it's become so outdated that it can't even process a 7-second TikTok video or, a 20-second video. So the data in a TikTok video is much bigger than a Nokia can process. There's not even an interface for the phone to show it. So when we talk about God, we're not talking about, and we're saying theoretically, even if, let's say that we don't know for sure, but if a God did exist, we would be way more than 20 years removed from that person. And what is the interface that we're going to perceive this person at? I mean, a TikTok video is in another dimension from what a Nokia phone can do, but it's still, in the third dimension of having, it exists in space and time. And we're talking about a being that exists before space and time. So what is the interface that we can experience this person in? Certainly the eyes are not calibrated to experience it, right? In the same way that your lips or your tongue can't taste color, similarly the eyes can't perceive that which is transcendental. Of course, in another literature, the Brahma Samhita, it says that though the supreme absolute truth is beyond, as Kuntī says here, the range of limited sense perception, those souls whose eyes are imbued or anointed with the ointment of love, they can perceive that person constantly within their hearts. So here we go to the commentary. Every verse has a commentary given by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So let's see what he has to say about this. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Śrī Krishna affirms that less intelligent persons mistake him to be an ordinary man like us, and thus they deride him. The same is confirmed herein by Queen Kuntī. The less intelligent persons are those who rebel against the authority of the Lord. Such persons are known as asuras, which is different from the suras. That's another word for demigods in Sanskrit. They're called suras because they obey the laws of divine harmony, whereas asuras disobey it, or they're not interested in working in concert with harmony, with divine harmony. The asuras cannot recognize the Lord's authority. When the Lord himself appears among us as Ram, Nrsimha, Varaha, or in his original form as Krishna, he performs many wonderful acts which are humanly impossible. As we shall find in the 10th canto of this great literature, Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Sri Krishna exhibited his humanly impossible activities even from the days of his lying on the lap of his mother. He killed the Putana witch, although she smeared her breast with poison just to kill the Lord. The Lord sucked her breast like a natural baby, and he sucked out her very life also. Similarly, he lifted the Govardhan hill, just as a boy picks up a frog's umbrella, and stood several days continuously, just to give protection to the residents of Vrindavana. The Vedic literatures make a point. The Vedic literatures are like a dictionary. There's so many terms that they define. They're very, it's like an encyclopedia of spiritual and metaphysical terms and concepts. And it's really beautiful. Because these, like the questions that have philosophers today scratching their heads are the subject matter of those Vedic literatures. They had the same questions like, what is the purpose of life? And then they also define purpose and life, which is something that philosophers today, are asking. Around the Renaissance, Descartes was asking questions about, I want to know about the nature of my reality, but how can I be sure that my reality even exists? Right? We've been asking the questions about what is the point of life and why are we here, but do we even know what the nature of life is, and do we even know what here is? What if the reason why the nature of reality is eluding us is because the nature of reality is illusory, and so it's impossible to put your finger on it? And so following the line of rationale as the skeptics, Descartes began to deny everything. He said, I can't prove that the world exists. And I can't prove that my thoughts about the world exist either, or that there's a correlation between them. It's possible that I'm thinking something about the world, but the world isn't like that at all. In the same way that a fish beneath water is interacting with its underwater reality, but that is not the absolute reality of the world. So the fish can say, oh yeah, there's a certain viscosity to life. You move your fins around a little bit and you're going to stay floating. And you breathe in this water and it tastes pretty good. You just got to keep moving, because otherwise you're gonna sink. But what does it know about flying? What does it know about mangoes or, strawberries and rain? So Descartes similarly was entertaining the thought that it's possible that what I think about my world doesn't have any bearing or correlation to the absolute world. Just like the fish is underwater, why should we think that being in air has a privileged position to reality? And in this way, Descartes just kept doubting and doubting until almost everything from the world had been doubted. But he arrived at one thing, an axiom upon which he built his new philosophy. And it's been immortalized by a very catchy phrase, which is in Latin, where he said famously, cogito ergo sum, which means, I think, therefore I am. So he arrived at the point where, okay, maybe my thoughts about the world are not correct, but I can't deny that I have thoughts. And because I have thoughts, I know that I exist. I don't know that other people are existing. He can't be sure of that. But he can say, I know that I am having a response to the world, and that my thinking is that response, but it's that response is coming from an individual, and that's me, sum, I am. So, the Vedic literatures are very interested in describing, in defining what sum is. So they also have that question, there is a reality, but the reality is always changing. But there is something beneath that reality that must not be changing, because all of this change must be existing on the platform or in the foreground of some deeper, unchanging reality, right? Because we can have a continuous perception of that changing reality. So if everything was changing, if my fundamental nature as an observer was the exact same as the nature of this changing reality, then I wouldn't be able to notice it's changing, because I would be changing with it. So I would have, perhaps no concept of the past, because I will have no experience of having been there. And so the Vedic literatures say that's right. It's because the nature of the observer is at its essence, different from the nature of the observed. So what we're observing is apara prakriti, which means material nature. But the observer is para prakriti, which means superior or metaphysical, spiritual nature. So in this way, they go and define things. And one of their greatest contributions is the definition of what God is. So the Vedic literatures, specifically Parashara Muni, said that God is that person who possesses all knowledge, all wealth, all beauty, all strength, all renunciation. Oh, I always forget the sixth one. What do we have? All beauty, all knowledge, all wealth, all renunciation, all strength, and all fame, to an unlimited degree, eternally. So that's their definition of Bhagavan. And it's a really great definition, right? Because you can see that some people have a lot of money, but they came into that money at some point, and then maybe they lost it. And some people are famous for a duration of time, like Charles Darwin and Richard Dawkins and other atheists may be very popular right now, but they are not popular for all time. No one knew Charles Dawkins or Charles Darwin, 400 years ago. But 400 years ago, people were talking about God, including the atheists. And then all strength, right? So you have people that can move trucks with their teeth. And then you have another type of strength, which is, people can command a lot of energy in the material world the way that they want. But they don't have that strength unlimitedly. They can't keep the orbits of the planets together. In the same way that, just consider the mathematical calculations that go into sending a spaceship into outer space and to keep a satellite revolving around the Earth. How much precision mathematics is required to keep a satellite in the orbit of the Earth? One number plus and it'll get launched beyond the gravitational pull of the Earth, and one number minus and it'll, burn on re-entry and then crash somewhere in Earth. So they had to figure out the perfect ratio or the perfect mathematical equation to keep that satellite revolving around Earth nicely. But now consider that the planets are doing the same thing. The planets aren't crashing into each other. And that requires a lot of precision. That requires a lot of intelligence, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of strength also to be able to keep it there. So that attraction to the nth degree is just a glimpse of the attraction of God. One funny way that I've heard it described is that, God is so attractive that even the atheist can't stop thinking about him, So that's the definition of God that the Vedic literatures give. And what's very important about that definition is that when the Supreme Person appears, he must conform to that definition perfectly. And Krishna conforms to this definition because at his very birth, he was performing activities that, not even the strongest people could do. He was showing knowledge that not even the greatest intellectual thinkers could come up with. As evidence, we cite the Bhagavad Gita, that conversation happened on this earth 5,000 years ago, and the greatest thinkers and spiritualists are still basing their spiritual knowledge and their spiritual theories on the foundation of that literature. That, the American Transcendentalist movement at the tail end of the Industrial Revolution in the 1900s was inspired by the great thinkers of the West looking back to the literatures of the East and finding among them the crest jewel, which was the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, what other literature describes so concisely the nature of the soul? In an experimental way too. The Bhagavad Gita gives very nice proofs by which that soul can be experienced. But then not only that, it goes so far as to say what is morality given that there is a soul, right? So science can't tell you what morality is because there's no, the law of the world is simply materialistic determinism. But the Bhagavad Gita puts a different picture, which is that actually the law comes from the preference of an individual. And so then it goes on to establish what a morality is based on the foundation of that soul. And then it talks about the interrelationship among other souls. It goes so far as to say that that's the basis of equality. Then it goes on to talk about the relationship with the greater soul, which is God. And it paints a picture of eternity. And it clears away any thought that there might be an eternal existence away from God. So this is the Bhagavad Gita. These are the qualifications of God. And so Krishna showed that, from his very appearance on earth, that this is what God is. So he does that for two reasons. One, to show us who he is, and also to set the bar that the other pretenders will have to beat. Because how many, quote unquote incarnations have there been? The word God is very cheap. Or it becomes cheap because this is the most famous person. It's the richest person. Like, why wouldn't you want to try to be God? So, those are some thoughts on these activities that Krishna's performing. So continuing with our reading, these are some of the superhuman activities of the Lord described in the authoritative Vedic literatures like the Puranas, Itihasas, which are histories, and Upanishads. He has delivered the wonderful instructions in the shape of the Bhagavad Gita. He has shown marvelous capacities as a hero, as a householder, as a teacher, and as a renouncer. He is accepted as the Supreme Personality of Godhead by such authoritative personalities as Vyasa, which is the author of the Vedic literatures, Devala, Asita, Narada, which is the spiritual master of the author of the Vedic literatures, Madhva, Shankara, Ramanuja. These are all founders of different sampradayas. And Shankara was actually an impersonalist, and even he admitted that Narayana Parovyaktat, that Narayan is beyond the material manifestation, or the temporary material manifestation. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Jiva Goswami, Vishwanatha Chakravarti, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and all other authorities of the line. He himself has declared as much in many places of the authentic literatures, and yet there is a class of men with demoniac mentality who are always reluctant to accept the Lord as the supreme absolute truth. This is partially due to their poor fund of knowledge and partially due to their stubborn obstinacy, which results from various misdeeds in the past and present. Such persons could not recognize Lord Sri Krishna even when he was present before them. Another difficulty is that those who depend more on their imperfect senses cannot realize him as the Supreme Lord. Such persons are like the modern scientist. They want to know everything by their experimental knowledge, but it is not possible to know the Supreme Person by imperfect experimental knowledge. He is described herein as adokshaja, or beyond the range of experimental knowledge. All our senses are imperfect. We claim to observe everything and everything, but we must admit that we can observe such things under certain material conditions only, which are also beyond our control. The Lord is beyond the observation of sense perception. Queen Kuntī accepts this deficiency of the conditioned soul, especially of the woman class, who are less intelligent. For the less intelligent, there must be such things as temples, mosques, or churches, so that they may begin to recognize the authority of the Lord and hear about him from authorities in such holy places. For the less intelligent, this beginning of spiritual life is essential, and only foolish men decry the establishment of... Let's see. We got kicked off on Instagram for a second, so we're going to go live again. For the less intelligent, this beginning of spiritual life is essential, and only foolish men decry the establishment of such places of worship, which are required to raise the standard of spiritual attributes for the mass of people. For less intelligent persons, bowing down before the authority of the Lord, as generally done in the temples, mosques, or churches, is as beneficial as it is for the advanced devotee to meditate upon him by active service. So we're going to leave off there. I want to make one small point, actually, regarding the point here that Srila Prabhupada made about the intelligence of women. So the Vedic literatures describe that there are three stages of intelligence. There's first, second, and third class intelligence. First class intelligence has to do with hearing something once and being able, from an authority, and being able to accept and assimilate it. The second type of intelligence has to be told something twice and experiment. They can only assimilate the truth after they've experienced it. So what's an example? Spiritual master says, this world is temporary, everyone before you has died, and the purpose of life is to regain your knowledge of your eternal existence. So the first class intelligence person is like, okay, that's it, I'm on it. The second class intelligent person says, I don't know, yeah, everything is temporary. Maybe there's something in the world that can give me some pleasure that I can enjoy. Maybe it's not necessary to have eternal experiences to be happy. So then that person goes on and interacts with the material world and has their temporary experiences, but then suffers greatly. And that suffering then gets them to see the truth of the spiritual master's statement, and they say, okay, I got it. So what's third class intelligence? Third class intelligence is that even after you experience the truth of the spiritual master's words, you still don't accept. So the spiritual master says this world is temporary, but you are not temporary. You are eternal, and if you want to have experiences that are compatible with your spiritual nature, you have to have spiritual experiences. But they still don't accept it. Now, there's different conditionings that affect every conditioned body. So the tree has its certain limitations of consciousness that are afforded it by its body. The psychophysical male body has certain limitations that are afforded it by its body, and the female body has its own psychophysical limitations afforded it by its body. So the Vedic literatures say that among all people, the most intelligent are those that are dedicated 100% to spiritual life. So because there's a biological, it's just seen that it's more difficult. It's been historically seen that it's been more difficult for women to accept the conclusions of spiritual life, that this world is a temporary place and it's not worth investing affection in this material world. And so that's why the Vedic literatures consider that kind of like, factory setting women will not accept the conclusion that spiritual life is the most important thing. And this is real spiritual life. This is not like feel good philosophy that it's just like, I want the kind of spirituality that makes me attractive to other people, or I want spiritual life that makes me popular. Spiritual life, it's at the cost of your material life. Spiritual life requires that you be okay with not having any fame, not having any beauty to speak of, not having any pull or influence in the material world. Actually, to take spiritual life seriously means to die to your material self. Now, this is like kind of factory setting women, but does that mean that the soul inside a woman body can't rise to the highest stages of spiritual perfection? Absolutely not. That's not what's being said here. But what the Vedic literatures are recognizing are that there are different conditional states, and that there are people in the world that won't take to spiritual life naturally, and these are people that are affected more by the mode of ignorance than by the mode of goodness. And there are people that don't have it within their nature to become naturally interested in spiritual practices, and so I just wanted to clarify those points. It's a subject that requires a cool-headed mind to talk about. I'm certainly not the best doer of justice to this point. But what I can see is that there are modes that affect people, different modalities that they behave in, and the modality that is said to affect women is a modality of nourishment and attention and nurturing for other people, and so that makes 100% attachment to the spiritual life more difficult, because in the highest stages of self-realization you should be ready. It doesn't mean that you must, but it means that you should be ready to leave your family. But if you have the doubt of, well, who's going to take care of my family if not me, then that is showing a particular attachment to the material body and the material bodies of others, and that's a disqualification from spiritual life. So it's seen that because men are more they tend to be more analytical, they can make an analytical cut from the material world because it's not because I accept that it's not my fundamental nature to be attached to it, so I can analytically detach from it. But women use both analysis and emotion, and so it's you can't just make a 100% analytical cut from the world when there's still this outlying emotional concern for other people. Well, what's going to happen to the world if we all go to the forest? You know what I mean? That's the emotional part of our brains. That's the emotional part of our psyche that is very important for developing systems that preserve what we have now and ensure that it is protected for the future. But also, on the same token, those things end up barring us from the highest stages of spiritual realization, wherein we trust that by simply serving God, all other needs will be satisfied. Okay, everyone. This has been a reading from Candlelight Nook. I want to thank everybody that tuned in to listen to us today. I'm trying to keep the conversation shorter. I ramble a lot, but this is all important stuff. It's worth talking about these literatures because, agree with everything that they say or not, but words like yoga, words like transcendence, liberation, all these words originally are found in the Vedic text. And so this culture was very concerned with things that are driving our contemporary culture forward. We're all interested in equality, and like we said earlier, the principles of spiritual equality are established in the Bhagavad Gita. And so, even if we don't find everything palpable at the first bite, like spinach, we'll find that even if it doesn't taste so good at first, if we add some salt of explanation, if we steam it a little bit in conversation, and if we serve it next to some potatoes of good company, then we'll get the right nutrients that we need. And so that's my impromptu analogy on the matter. I hope you all have had a great week. I hope that this conversation helps in having a beginning to a good week, wherever you are in the world. I hope that you find your North Star a little brighter. And I'll see you next Saturday. This has been Candlelight Nook. Once again, my name is Diogo. Take care. Hey folks, this is a post-podcast, kind of like a PS that comes after a audio message. I wanted to make sure that I keep the channel open, that if anyone has any questions or comments or wants to discuss what we went over in the podcast, please let me know. Once again, the email is candlelightnook@gmail.com. And I just want to put in one more message. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's described that there are 3 different modalities of nature that everything in the world is operating through. So one way that I've learned to understand the modes of nature is understanding the primary colors. That everything that we see in the world that exists on the visible spectrum is composed of 3 primary colors, or can be seen as different combinations of 3 basic colors that can't be produced from anything else. So similarly, the modalities that we can behave under are goodness, passion, and ignorance, or you could see it as stability, passion and acceleration, and lethargy, right? So the Vedic literatures give very specific descriptions on different types of combinations that these modalities form to make different bodies. And so it's seen that the body that is influenced by goodness to the greatest degree is called that person is called a brahmana in society, because that person has a tendency towards philosophical pursuits, that they have a tendency to practice austerity, to sit still and to control their breath, to eat in a very regulated way. Whereas the bodies that are composed of mixed modes of passion and ignorance and some goodness are seen as administrators, or they're seen as a mercantile class. And the bodies that are produced mostly of the mode of ignorance tend to be the laboring, or the workforce class. Now, you may be your alarms may be blaring that, hey, that's the caste system. I've heard about that. That's an oppressive system that seems to keep people in their positions forever. But the Vedic literatures don't mention the caste system. They mention the varnashram dharma. See, so the caste system is just looking at the superficial results of that analysis of the modalities of nature. The Vedic literatures talk about something much more profound, which is varnashram dharma. And that is that whereas individuals can be seen as belonging to different influences of modalities by practice of meditation, by practice of regulated behaviors, and by practice of communal activities that are all geared toward one goal, which is ultimately to serve the whole, then a person's modality can be purified. A person's modality can be elevated. So a person that was born with their body affected primarily by the modality of ignorance, that person is permitted to, by the practice of regulated behaviors, elevate their own influence to the mode of goodness, or to purify their tendencies to be affected by the modality of ignorance. So when these literatures say that women and the working class are less intelligent, it's because the modality, like I mentioned, the factory setting modality is to be more attached to material things and less interested in spiritual things. But that is not, how something comes out of the factory is not how it needs to remain for the rest of its life. So, and just to give a personal example, because I think that that's important, I have a tendency to sleep a lot. I spent at least 5 years of my life heavily drugged. Even though my family, even though so many people in my family liked to read, I was never interested in reading. I liked to walk around and ride my bike a lot and just walk in the forest. But I always thought reading was very tedious. And just an anecdote that, one time when I was in second grade, my dad came to I think it was second, third grade, my dad came to a parent-teacher conference, and the teacher was telling my dad that out of 23 assignments, or 24 assignments that we had due, I had missed 23. And the only assignment that I had done was an assignment that we had in class. I was a terrible student. I never took learning seriously. I never took academics seriously. And so, a person could say that I was totally affected by the mode of ignorance, right? And then I wasn't, I still don't consider myself a particularly intelligent person, but what I do have right now is a desire to take knowledge seriously and to implement that knowledge in my life to the greatest degree that I can. But that isn't how I came out of the factory, right? Like, my factory setting was to, do drugs, to tune in and drop out. And so I just want to say that, when these literatures talk about that, it can seem very exclusive. It can seem like it's, barring somebody from practicing. But, one thing that a person that's practicing spiritual life has to consider, or is probably considering, is that my life right now is not going the best way that I think it can. And I want to take spiritual life seriously, or I want to take some kind of process of self-help or self-betterment seriously, because I want to improve the quality of my life. Now that is a very humbling position to take, and that's also a position that requires that a person admit that they're not doing the best. But I understand that when somebody else tells us that we're not doing our best, we can take it a little differently. It's almost like it's better to come to terms with our own limitations on our own than to be told by someone else that we have limitations. So I just wanted to give this, postscript, because I ascribe to the view of the spiritualists that all beings are created equal, but that those beings, while they are spiritually equal, have inherited different rewards from their own activities, and those rewards are themselves the limitations that they have to deal with. So our psychophysical features of our bodies and our intellects are limitations that we have to work with, but they are not our destiny. They may be the first step of our fate, but they aren't our destiny. And so everyone, I invite everybody to look beyond the designations of gender, the different designations of psychological states, and if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. To quote the great and late George McFly. And on that note, folks, I'll leave you. This has been a bit longer episode of Candlelight Nook than I would have liked, but I do want to make sure that the sanctity of the safe space that we're trying to create here is upheld, that nobody feels turned away from spiritual practice, and that you know that there is the fact of a literature that is revealing very high concepts, but there's also the fact of a dynamic spirit in all of us that is really trying to understand these scriptures in our present context, and having to maintain as wide of a view as possible given all the specificities. That being said, I look forward to seeing you next Saturday. I hope you can join in on the conversation, and remember to send us some feedback on what you think we should read next. So far, it's between the Corpus Hermeticum and the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ. All right, bye.
Left hand is for the sweeper, with the right he does the rest. Left hand is for the sweeper, with the right he does the rest. Resting place of every living entity. Resting place of every living entity.